Archive Case File 003, The 13th Slipper. Classification: Forbidden Folklore, Movement Pattern Anomalies. Recovered from Royal Estate Ruins, Sub-Basement Level 4. Archivist Notes: Fragment. Redacted passages indicate rhythmic interference. Scripted patterns repeat, but one line never matches the others. The missing footstep appears intentional. Proceed carefully. Welcome to Twilight Fables, where stories never sleep and some footsteps echo long after the dancers are gone. The first night the king heard the footsteps, he mistook them for ghosts. In fairness, the palace had always carried that sense of lingering memory, with its countless halls and corridors that seemed to remember every sorrow, every betrayal, and every secret that had been whispered into stone. Yet these footsteps were unlike anything the palace had ever held in its memory. They were deliberate, precise, and cold. Not soft, not mournful, not hesitant, they marched with an intent that made the hairs on the king's neck stand on end. He counted them in his mind, 12 distinct rhythms, all aligned perfectly above his bed in the uppermost chamber. The wear on the princess's slippers, which he had noticed earlier in the day, had seemed strange. Not worn from ordinary play, not scuffed by dancing across the ballroom floor, but filed down in subtle ways, like someone had dragged them over stone or cobblestone in a private, endless rehearsal. He rose from his bed, robes dragging behind him, and stepped quietly to the door, trying to convince himself it was nothing more than an illusion of sleep-deprived imagination. When he opened the door, the corridor stretched before him in faint moonlight, reflected off polished marble, and yet the sound persisted. The rhythm traveled through the walls, through the air, through the stone itself. Beneath it, a second, slower vibration pulsed in the floors, subtle but insistent, like a heartbeat. It was out of sync with the 12 measured steps above, yet it was deliberate, as if it were searching, measuring, waiting. He tried to dismiss it, shaking his head, telling himself he was imagining more than he should. In the morning, the princesses all appeared at breakfast with the same serene porcelain smiles they had worn for as long as anyone could remember, their eyes betraying none of the exhaustion that must have accompanied the night's activity. Yet the king, ever vigilant, noted a subtle, dulled sheen in their gaze, a tiredness that did not come from ordinary sleep. They looked like children performing adult roles on stage, their innocence polished away in layers of routine. The eldest, Princess Amara, greeted him with mechanical composure. "Father, you look pale. Did you sleep well?" she said, her voice sweet, but carrying an odd timbre, almost rehearsed. When he attempted to question how they had slept, she replied, 12 dreams. 12 perfect dreams." The others nodded with uncanny precision. Perfect dreams. He recoiled slightly. Dreams could never be perfect. They were chaotic, fleeting, stubbornly unpredictable. Yet they spoke of them as though the phrase had been drilled into them, repeated nightly as part of a ritual the king did not yet understand. Disturbed beyond words, he summoned the royal archivist, the man whose age and stoop were eclipsed only by the breadth of knowledge he carried. The archivist arrived carrying a bundle of parchment under his arm, the air around him heavy with the scent of old ink and musty paper. He unrolled the first sheet carefully, revealing 12 pairs of slippers drawn with meticulous precision, and one faint 13th pair, erased almost entirely, leaving only the shadow of its outline. "This is a record from 50 years ago," the archivist said, his voice low, "from when the palace first noted the anomaly. The 13th slipper was documented but deliberately obscured. Someone knew its significance." The king's chest tightened. 13 slippers, he whispered. "Why 13? I only have 12 daughters." The archivist's eyes darkened. "The pattern is older than this kingdom, older than even the first walls of this palace. Repeated enough, the movements, the steps, the dance itself begins to acquire a will. A ritual performed nightly for decades becomes something else. If a step is missing, a dancer absent, the pattern seeks correction, completion." The king's stomach churned. "Do you mean to say it will take one of my daughters?" "Or create one," the archivist murmured, to satisfy the pattern's design. That night, the king ordered the princess's rooms secured. Locks on doors, guards stationed in the corridors, wards painted on the thresholds in bloodless ink that shimmered faintly under torchlight. He believed he had done everything possible to contain them. Yet when darkness fell, a soft scratching began, like fingernails against stone, echoing from deep within the palace. It was followed by an unfamiliar hum, 12 voices singing in precise but alien harmony, a melody that twisted in spirals and refused to resolve. The sound grew, and beneath it the slow pulse persisted, a 13th rhythm, patient and insistent. Guards froze, whispering in fear, eyes wide as the stone seemed to move beneath them. Compelled by a force he could neither name nor resist, the king unlocked the door to Amara's room. The air that rushed out was cold and dry, carrying with it the scent of stone and age, of secrets buried and disturbed. She sat on the bed, hands folded, staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "We tried to stop it." The king demanded, "Stop what?" She looked past him to the wall behind her. The stone cracked, split along a seam that had never existed before, revealing a staircase spiraling into darkness. The other 11 princesses appeared in the corridor behind him, their silhouettes framed by faint torchlight, trembling, yet moving independently for the first time in months. "We are tired," one whispered. "We cannot dance anymore." The shadow emerged from the staircase, towering, human-shaped, yet missing one leg, reaching, stretching. The archivist muttered, 13, it only needs one more. The shadow moved with unnatural swiftness back into the darkness of the hidden stairwell. The wall snapped shut like a closing jaw. Later, the king found the archivist's study in ruin. Parchment torn, ink spilled, notes scrawled in frantic, barely legible handwriting. Amid the chaos, he discerned the final message. The pattern feeds on absence. Count the daughters every morning. If one is missing, the palace will not give her back. Beware the dancer with no slippers. The palace felt alive, watching him, breathing, plotting. Every hallway, every corridor, every shadow leaned inward, angling toward unseen purpose. That night, the king could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the scraping returned. The heartbeat pulsed beneath the floors, and the fragile voices of his daughters whispered from behind locked doors, pleading for a reprieve from the relentless rhythm that had claimed them long before he understood the nature of the pattern. In the morning, when roll was called, 12 footsteps answered. 11 voices replied. One daughter had vanished from the sequence. The pattern was already correcting itself. The staircase beneath the palace had vanished, leaving only a faint fissure in the stone where it had emerged. But its presence lingered in the halls like a memory too heavy to ignore. The princesses huddled together in the observatory tower, their hands clutching each other's sleeves, trembling not from cold but from the knowledge of what waited below. Their eyes, once dulled by endless nights of dancing, now glimmered with fear, sharpened by understanding. Amara, eldest among them, pressed her forehead against the tower window, watching the gray morning light stretch across the palace grounds. "It will come for us," she whispered, though her voice was almost swallowed by the wind. The other princesses murmured in agreement, the syllables threading together like fragile threads in a tapestry of terror. The king had tried to reassure them, but the futility of his words was evident. He had already seen what the absence of a single dancer could produce. In the cold corridors, the palace had begun to breathe, almost imperceptibly, as though inhaling their fear and exhaling a heavier, unseen pressure. The guards stationed outside their chamber reported strange sensations beneath their feet, a vibration that had no source but seemed to move with intent. Shadows shifted at angles that contradicted the light, the edges of doors and windows warping subtly. Even the tapestries on the walls appeared to twitch when no one was near them, revealing glimpses of figures that weren't supposed to exist. The princesses, despite their youth, understood what the archivist had meant by the pattern. It was not merely a dance, it was a design woven into the bones of the palace itself, a ritual older than the memory of any living soul. The 13th dancer was not an intruder in the ordinary sense. It was part of the architecture, part of the floorboards and the walls, seeking to complete itself in flesh where it could not in stone. That night, Amara could not sleep. She rose quietly, slipping past her sisters and the half-conscious guards, moving toward the corridor that led to the old ballroom. The door, which should have been locked and barred, stood slightly ajar. A chill rushed out, carrying the scent of stone dust and something more intangible, something old and waiting. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The ballroom had been abandoned for decades, its chandeliers long stripped of candles, the floor scarred with generations of forgotten dances. Yet tonight, the air seemed charged, resonating with a low hum that vibrated along the ribs and floors, a sound both musical and mechanical. 12 pairs of slippers glided across the surface of the floor without feet. They moved in perfect synchrony, circling endlessly, following a pattern only they knew. And then beneath them, a 13th step pressed into existence. The shadow that had appeared on the staircase stretched across the floor, thin and impossible, a silhouette that lacked a right leg yet moved fluidly, as if the floor itself animated it. Amara froze, the 13th dancer approaching the line of floating slippers. She realized with sickening clarity that the entity was learning, absorbing the movements of her sisters, mimicking their rhythm to infiltrate their world. She turned to flee, but the exit behind her seemed farther than it should be. The walls contracted subtly, guiding her gaze to the far corner where a fragment of the floor had split. Another staircase, one smaller, narrower, twisted, had begun to form. She understood then that the palace itself was creating pathways for the 13th dancer, feeding it the geometry of escape and opportunity, shaping the architecture to serve its purpose. In a panic, Amara raced back toward the observatory tower, the hum of the ballroom chasing her, vibrating through the floorboards. The guards noticed her absence and followed, but when they reached the corridor, they found it warped, impossibly long, bending in ways the human eye should not have permitted. Doors led into walls, corners curved where there should have been straight lines, and the scent of old stone grew thick, heavy with expectation. At the top of the tower, the princesses huddled, counting each other, hoping that no absence would be discovered. But even as they tallied, one of them, the youngest, Lyora, was missing. Her absence had been subtle, almost imperceptible. The others hadn't noticed until the floor above trembled slightly, a slow pulse echoing down into the foundations. Amara's heart leapt. The pulse was the same as the 13th dancer's heartbeat. The missing princess had already been marked. The king arrived shortly after, breathless, calling her name into corridors that twisted impossibly, never giving back the sound in the way it had left. The hum from the ballroom grew louder, more insistent, seeping into the stone and timber of the palace, and with it came whispers, incoherent but deliberate, as if the walls themselves spoke a language older than memory. The shadows elongated, flickering, reaching around corners and across ceilings, trailing behind anyone who moved. Amara realized the truth. The palace had been waiting, feeding, shaping the pattern for decades, and now, with the missing princess, it was nearly complete. That night, they tried to keep vigil. Candles lined the corridors, their flames bending unnaturally, pointing toward hidden fissures in the walls. The guards formed a line in the corridors, swords drawn, though they shivered in fear, their weapons shaking as the floor throbbed beneath their feet. The 13th dancer emerged from a crack beneath the ballroom, a form that was impossibly tall and thin, stretching across walls and ceilings with movements both human and impossible. It learned, adapted, and adjusted to the positions of the 12 remaining princesses. Every time a slipper slid across the floor above, it mirrored, seeking alignment. It was patient, calculating, and precise. When Amara tried to speak to her sisters, to tell them to stay together, the shadows reached toward them, coaxing, almost gentle in a way that made her stomach churn. The entity did not need to strike. It needed compliance, and the compliance it sought was a dance in its own image. Hours passed. The palace seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously, stretching the perception of time until the princess's muscles ached as if they had been dancing for weeks without rest. Their minds became sluggish, thoughts looping in fractal patterns. The king tried to intervene, but each attempt to lead a daughter away was met with subtle resistance, walls bending, doors shifting, the hum guiding their movements back into the pattern. Exhaustion set in, both physical and mental. One by one, the princesses began to sway, their limbs moving in rhythm without conscious intent. Amara fought it, resisting with everything she had, but the floor beneath her began to pulse with pressure under each footfall, guiding her movements into alignment. The king could only watch as the 13th dancer closed the final gaps, positioning itself precisely opposite where the missing daughter should have been. It extended its single leg, dragging the air as though shaping space itself, and the palace responded, folding walls and corridors in concert with the movement. It waited, a sentient gap in the rhythm, ready to complete the circle. Amara screamed, a sound swallowed by the walls as the remaining 11 daughters and the shadow began to move together, forming the pattern the palace demanded. The pulse from below intensified, resonating with the steps, the swaying, the rhythm that had existed long before the walls were built. For the first time, the king understood the archivist's warning. The 13th dancer did not need a slipper. It was not human. It was the pattern, made flesh, moving through stone and shadow, an inevitable culmination of years of repetition. And it wanted them all. Lyora's absence had been enough to activate the final phase. The king tried to run, but corridors twisted underfoot, the floor pulsing beneath him as though resisting escape. The last thing he saw before the shadow swallowed the upper tower was the faint outline of 13 figures moving in impossible unity, a rhythm that would continue beyond any normal measure of time. The palace exhaled around him, a living thing that had been patient for centuries. And now, with the pattern nearly complete, it would not relent. The palace had changed completely, its corridors now a labyrinth of impossible geometry, shadows bending around corners and ceilings, whispering with a language no human tongue could speak. The remaining 11 princesses were trapped within the upper floors, their movements subtly influenced by the pulse emanating from deep below. The rhythm of the 13th dancer now fully integrated into the stone and walls. Amara led them cautiously, attempting to resist, but every step seemed dictated by the palace itself, guiding them toward rooms that did not exist the day before, hallways that twisted back on themselves, doors that opened into walls. The king followed as best he could, exhausted, heart hammering, eyes darting at every subtle movement in the shadows. He realized that the palace no longer obeyed the logic of man. It obeyed the pattern, and the pattern obeyed nothing but itself. Night after night, the same rhythm persisted. 12 slippers slid across the floor, floating or worn, mirrored by an invisible 13th step, the shadow now permanent, always just out of reach, observing, correcting, waiting. The princesses, though human, had begun to move in their sleep, walking in circles around rooms they could not escape, dancing without rest, their minds slowly unraveling. The king discovered that no matter where he placed guards, how he sealed doors or reinforced thresholds, the palace found a way to rout the pattern, bending corridors, shifting stairs, creating fissures and tunnels that led the dancers back into alignment. Exhaustion was inevitable, both physical and mental. The princess's thoughts looped endlessly, fractal spirals of fear and memory, unable to break free from the rhythm. The pulse beneath the stone grew louder each night, resonating through walls and floors, guiding the motions of the living, shaping the palace itself in response to the dance. Amara realized that the pattern was no longer external. It had merged with their bodies and minds, an invisible conductor pulling each limb and thought into harmony. One evening, the king climbed the highest tower he could access, determined to confront the palace itself. From that height, he saw corridors folding into corridors, walls bending impossibly, windows reflecting rooms that should not exist. The hum of the pattern filled the air, vibrating in his bones, a low, mechanical music that resonated with something deep within him, almost calling him to join. The 13th dancer emerged once more, not as shadow or silhouette, but as a shifting form of stone and air. A presence felt more than seen, a single leg extending and bending impossibly to fill the gaps of absence. Amara and the others tried to run, to flee, but the palace guided their steps, folding spaces beneath their feet, steering them inexorably toward the ballroom. There, the 12 slippers moved in perfect alignment, floating, gliding, a rhythm that had existed long before any human memory. The 13th step followed, invisible to the eye yet profoundly present, a final pulse in the architecture of the palace, completing the pattern. The king, desperate, attempted to break the sequence to pull his daughters free, but the palace resisted. Doors swung shut, corridors bent, walls rose where floors had been. Every movement toward freedom was countered, every attempt undone. He watched, helpless, as the princesses began to move in the same rhythm unconsciously. Bodies swaying, limbs extending in perfect synchronization, faces pale and focused, yet filled with terror. Amara tried to speak, to warn them, to resist, but the words were swallowed by the pulse. The 13th dancer, now fully realized, moved as though the floor itself had taken form, completing the circle of 12, filling the absence of the missing daughter with its own impossible presence. The king understood the truth in the archivist's redacted notes. The pattern required completion. It would not be broken. It would not stop. The missing dancer had been replaced not by flesh alone, but by the palace's will, by the rhythm that had existed in the stone and the shadows for centuries. The final dance commenced. 12 human forms moved in unison with the 13th, the entity that had emerged from the fissures of the palace, a living gap that sought fulfillment. The king could do nothing but watch as the rhythm consumed the upper floors, spiraling outward, bending corridors, twisting the palace into a labyrinth of repetition and inevitability. He tried to flee, to escape the pulse, but the building itself resisted, corridors stretching into infinity, doors opening into walls, stairs folding into ceilings. Every step he took brought him closer to the center of the pattern, and the center had already claimed his daughters. Days or nights passed indistinguishably, marked only by the unbroken rhythm of 12 paired movements, mirrored by the 13th, the pulse of the pattern resonating through everything. Amara and the others moved endlessly, consciousness fraying, their wills subsumed, yet somewhere in the deepest recess of her mind, Amara retained a spark of recognition, an awareness that this was not merely a dance, but a consuming force older than the palace, older than the kingdom. The king, now aged beyond years, wandered through corridors that led nowhere, windows that reflected rooms that should not exist. Every reflection, every shadow, every pulse reminded him of the inevitability he could not stop. In the final observation, he noted the 13th dancer had become indistinguishable from the palace itself. It was everywhere and nowhere, guiding the rhythm, correcting errors, consuming absence, and shaping the living into compliance. The 12 princesses continued their dance, joined by the entity that had claimed the missing position. The rhythm persisted without pause, beyond hunger, beyond awareness, beyond hope. The king understood that this palace would never release them. Not in life, not in death. The archivist's warnings were clear. The pattern would feed on absence, would claim what was missing, would complete itself eternally. The final memory he recorded, in whatever remaining clarity he had, was of the 12 and the 13th moving in impossible harmony, a pattern older than time, echoing in stone, in shadows, in memory, forever unbroken. And with the 13th step now present, the circle was complete. The pulse of the palace, once faint, became constant, omnipresent, guiding each breath, each movement, each thought, until the line between human and pattern no longer existed. Outside observers would see an abandoned palace, silent and cold, yet inside the rhythm endured, the dance continued, unbroken, eternal, a living architecture of motion and intent, a palace that had claimed its dancers and replaced absence with perfection.
Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.